When Kurt died, I was lost. I was numb. The music I had devoted my life to betrayed me. I had no voice. I turned off the radio. I put away my drums. I couldn't bear to hear someone else's voice singing about joy, or even pain. Dave Grohl. As a musician myself, I have many people who influenced me, with Kurt Cobain being one of them. Kurt Cobain was the frontman band for the band Nirvana, of the leading grunge band in the 1980s and 1990s that led grunge into mainstream media. Without Kurt Cobain or his music, music wouldn't be itself today. Kurt Donald Cobain was born on February 20th, 1967, in Aberdeen, Washington. His parents lived in Hoquiam, Washington. Because of this, there was a speculation that he was actually born there, but his birth certificate does say that he was born in Aberdeen. He was born to Don and Wendy Cobain, and before Kurt's birth, they went to Idaho to get married without parental consent, because at the time of his conception, his parents were both underage. At the time of his birth, Don was a mechanic, and Wendy was a stay-at-home mom. Kurt Cobain had a fairly good childhood until about the age of 2. At 2, he created an imaginary friend named Boda, who would be carried on throughout his life. In September 1972, he attended kindergarten at Robert Gray Elementary School, and at the end of the year, the teacher wrote that he was a really good student. At 5, he had the potential of becoming a really good artist, and at age 9, his life took a turn and his parents divorced. He lived with his father, and visited his mom and sister on weekends. He experimented with drugs in his mid-teens, and he was still under his father's care. Because of the divorce, he was so withdrawn and angry at his father, blaming him and thinking that he loved his stepmother's child more than him. He left his father in 1982. According to Charles Cross, the author of Heavier Than Heaven, over the next 4 years, he would live in 10 different houses with 10 different families, and none would feel like home. He graduated high school in Aberdeen, and would even be offered an art scholarship that he would turn down to pursue his music career. In 1988, Nirvana was born. It consisted of 3 people, and those were Kurt Cobain, Dave Grohl, and Chris Novoselic. When Nirvana first formed, grunge music was alive and thriving. Little did they know that they would bring grunge music to popularity in the late 80s to early 90s. Kyle Kottner, author of Biola University's student-ran paper, states, Cobain pushed the then polarizing sound into national spotlight. Nirvana released their first independent single, called Love Buzz, under the record label Sub Pop. And under the same label, in 1989, they released their first full-length album, named Bleach. In 1991, under DCG Records, they would release their infamous record Nevermind, containing their #1 hit single, Smells Like Teen Spirit, that would stay at the top of #1 on the charts for months to come. When the band was on the road, Kurt was very specific about how everything was ran. In the book Kurt Cobain Journals, a compilation of the journals Kurt Cobain had wrote, he himself writes, every 400 miles, there will be an inspection check of van cleanliness and equipment count, find a safe place to pull over, and take every piece of musical equipment out. On the road, he would also meet Courtney Love, who he would then get married to in 1992, and would go on to have a daughter he would name Frances Bean Cobain. Nirvana released their last album, titled In Utero, in 1993. Kurt Cobain's musical run would come to an end on April 8, 1994, at the age of 27. He was found in Seattle, Washington, believed to have committed suicide. An autopsy report stated that he had a single gunshot wound that seemed to be self-inflicted and 225 milligrams of heroin in his body, which was 3 times the lethal amount. He left behind a suicide note that was addressed to Boda, his imaginary friend from childhood, and because the suicide note was released to the public, many people speculated that he was actually murdered. Many people believe that Courtney Love, his then-wife, was the culprit. Author Emily Reed states, the bottom 4 lines of the so-called suicide note seem forged, noticeably having little similarity to the top portions and appearing as though the lines were added on later. Many question why he shot himself, although he had already injected 3 times the lethal dose of heroin into his system. Others question how he was even coherent enough to shoot himself with such a lethal dose coursing through his veins. I believe personally that this is not true. I believe that because of Kurt's troubled past, that he was more depressed than his family and friends originally thought, and that he felt suicide was his only answer. And I also believe that his suicide was a wake-up call to many. Regardless, the music industry mourned his death of the fellow rockers. and with many also being affected, from fans to family to musicians. Kurt Cobain lived a wonderful 27 years of life. His story, music, legacy live on the hearts of everyone. Without Nirvana, rock music that we know and love today would not be what it is. And many bands still draw influence from Nirvana and Kurt Cobain's music. Kurt Cobain will forever live on in my heart-shaped box, along with those of many others. Thank you.